Ancient chronicles describe cases when a person in the blink of an eye seems to disappear into thin air before the eyes of eyewitnesses. Historians do not take them seriously, considering them fiction. However, these mysterious disappearances happen in our days. Every year, thousands of people disappear without a trace, all over the world. Traditionally, it is believed that for the most part, they are victims of unsolved crimes. However, in the 20th century, there was a hypothesis that Earthlings are kidnapped by aliens. It is possible that both occur. However, there are cases when a person disappears right in front of witnesses who say that he instantly disappeared in the literal sense of the word. Evidence of the past for the first time about such a mysterious case that occurred in ancient Greece, mentions Plato. In the middle of the battle, one of the warriors who had been stabbed with a dart suddenly disappeared in the air. And where he had stood, his weapons, shield, and even the fatal dart remained. In the East, especially in India and Tibet, sudden disappearances were common. They did not see anything unusual in them, explaining by what is now called teleportation, when a person moves from one place to another in the blink of an eye with the help of special psychotechnics. Well, in the distant past, it was said that he flew to another world. The European medieval chronicles also mention cases of instantaneous disappearance of people in the presence of witnesses, but, unfortunately, the details are not given. But in the 18th century they were described in detail. In what was then England, the disappearance of former seaman Owen Parfitt made a lot of noise. All his life he sailed the world, was a prisoner of pirates. The sailor returned home almost paralyzed. All day long, he sat in a wheelchair on the porch of his older sister Susanna's house and told his adventures to anyone who would listen. On the evening of June 7, 1763, Parfitt, as usual, sat in his chair on the porch and watched the workmen shoveling hay on a nearby farm. The sky was overcast with storm clouds, and they were in a hurry to finish their work before it rained. When lightning flashed on the horizon, Susanna followed a neighbor who was helping her bring her brother's stroller into the house. Owen told her to take her time, it wouldn't hurt if she got a little wet. The sister and the neighbor had already reached the house and could clearly see the invalid on the porch. But, as is the case with women, they stopped to chat because the rain hadn't started yet. When they looked at the porch, there was no one there. The women thought that the invalid had somehow crossed the threshold into the house. But it turned out that the wheelchair was in the same place, and on it lay his greatcoat. The farmhands working on the next plot didn't see anyone. The long search for the missing Owen Parfitt ended in vain. In 1809, an equally mysterious case occurred in Germany. British diplomat Benjamin Bathurst was returning home from an important mission. On the way, along with a friend, he stopped for dinner at an inn in the German village of Perelberg. After supper they returned to the carriage. But before getting into it, the diplomat decided to examine the horses. As his friend watched, Bathurst faded into thin air as he stroked one of the seat belts. His friend was so startled that he was speechless. When he came to his senses, he called for help from the people in the inn. But no matter how much they searched for the missing diplomat, they could not find him. In 1867, a mysterious disappearance took place in Paris under the eyes of Dr. Bonvillain. The victim was his neighbor Lucien Boussier. Here is the brief account of this trustworthy witness. Lucien went to the doctor to consult about his weakness. Bonvillain asked him to undress and lie down on the couch, which he did. The doctor moved away for a moment to get a stethoscope from the table, and when he turned to the couch, the patient was not there. And his clothes were lying next to him on a chair. Bonvillain immediately went to the neighbor's apartment, but it was empty. The police, to whom the doctor reported the next day, did not find the missing person. Where the naked man could have gone is a mystery. But the most famous case of sudden disappearance occurred in 1880 in America on the outskirts of the town of Gallatin in Tennessee, on the farm of David Lang. After washing the dishes, the farmer and his wife, Emma, left the house. The woman went to the children playing in the yard, and the husband went to the horses grazing in the meadow in front of the house. A few dozen yards from the house, Lang saw a gig driven by his friend Judge August Peck and his son-in-law. The judge was noticed by all the other members of the household, to whom Peck always brought gifts. They cheered and waved at him. The farmer also waved to his friend, and before he reached the horses, he turned and hurried back to the house to meet them. But after walking a few meters, David Lang suddenly disappeared into thin air in front of 5 witnesses. Emma screamed aloud, afraid that her husband had fallen into the hole. Then, with the judge, his son-in-law, and the children, they went all over the field, looking particularly carefully at the spot where David had disappeared, but they found no trace of him or any holes. The search, which involved dozens of Lang's neighbors and townspeople, turned up nothing. All the American newspapers wrote about this case at the time. Many theories were put forward, but none of them could explain what happened to the farmer. The Bennington Triangle and other horrors in the 20th century, there were especially several dozen disappearances in the northeastern United States in the vicinity of the town of Bennington, Vermont, which journalists even called the Bennington Triangle, by analogy with the famous Bermuda Triangle, where ships and planes disappear without a trace. People in the Bennington Triangle disappeared into their gardens and homes, on the streets and at gas stations. And on December 1, 1949, soldier James Thetford disappeared in the presence of 14 witnesses in the cabin of a bus. All the passengers saw him sit down in his seat and fall asleep immediately after the bus left the station. However, when the bus arrived in Bennington an hour later, which never stops on the way, Thetford was not on it. His bag was still on the shelf above the seat, and there was only a crumpled newspaper in the space that James had occupied. Before that, he was a committed materialist, and always laughed when he heard about some devilish thing with mysterious disappearances. The youngest victim of the Bennington Triangle was 8-year-old Paul Jackson, who disappeared on October 12, 1950. He was playing in the farmyard next to the pigsty. His mother went in to water the pigs, and when she came out a few minutes later, her son was gone. The woman searched the farm and the surrounding area, calling loudly for Paul, but he did not respond. Hundreds of police, rescuers and volunteers searched for the boy for several days, but it did not yield any results. People disappeared in other places as well. So, in 1975, the American Jackson Wright was driving with his wife in a Ford from New Jersey to New York. As he passed through the Lincoln Tunnel, he noticed that the car windows were fogged up. Wright pulled over to the side of the road, stopped, and asked his wife to wipe them down. Martha Wright got out of the car with a rag, went to the windshield, and disappeared. Not understanding what had happened, the husband also got out of the car and began to look around. But the woman was nowhere to be seen. Wright was stopped by a passing police patrol, who immediately began searching for Mrs. Wright. As in other cases, they were in vain. The most mysterious researchers of anomalous phenomena believe that what happened in 1971 in the most, perhaps, mysterious place in the foggy Albion Stonehenge. At that time, access to the famous prehistoric megaliths was open day and night. So on August 17, 7 hippies decided to spend the night among the boulders. They set up tents, built a fire, smoked weed, and began to sing songs. About 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a dull rumble of thunder, and bright flashes of lightning cut through the darkness. At this time, 2 witnesses passed by Stonehenge, a policeman and a farmer. According to them, the huge stone suddenly lit up with a blue light so bright that it hurt the eyes. They heard someone shouting. Thinking that someone was struck by lightning, they rushed to help. But near the megaliths there were only empty tents where someone's things were lying. The policeman and the farmer waited until morning, but no one came. Later it turned out that a group of hippies had camped there for the night and disappeared without a trace. In the winter of 1930, an entire Eskimo village with several dozen inhabitants disappeared. Fur trapper Joe LaBelle was snowshoeing along the shore of Canada's Lake Anjikuni. He knew the country well, and had been to the village many times, where he was received as a welcome guest. On this occasion, however, no one met him, although he fired a rifle on his approach to announce his arrival. The village seemed to have died out. The houses and outbuildings were empty. In some cases, the coals in the stoves were still warm and food was still on the tables. All the clothes were there. But without it, in this cold, no one would have dared to leave the house. Besides, there were no signs of people around the village. The baffled hunter hurried back to the nearest village to inform the authorities of the empty village. An investigation was launched, but the Eskimos could not be found. In the Soviet Union, the press never wrote about such mysterious incidents. But that doesn't mean they didn't happen. It is just that in a country with a materialistic ideology, it was forbidden to publicize phenomena with mystical overtones, even if they were registered by law enforcement agencies. However, before the arrival of Soviet power in Russia, people probably disappeared before the eyes of eyewitnesses. This is evidenced by an old expression that exists in the Russian language. The devils took away. This is how witnesses could explain the incredible phenomenon when a person was just in front of them and then suddenly disappeared. Black holes of our world today cannot be blamed on the devils. You need to look for an explanation, or at least put forward hypotheses about the mechanism of this phenomenon. The anomaly researchers made a seemingly reasonable assumption. People disappear because they are drawn into the so-called whirlpools of time. Against it is the fact that the missing never reappear in our world, as is often the case with Gone with Time. In addition, temporary anomalies are accompanied by a characteristic visible phenomenon: luminous clouds. People who are close to them, there are various painful symptoms: dizziness and headache, vomiting, severe weakness, lack of coordination. And some of them, when a luminous cloud appears, their hair stands on end, their body becomes covered with goosebumps, their hands tremble, and sometimes they lose consciousness. In addition, time anomalies leave behind other material traces: stalled motors, stopped clocks, extinguished electric lamps. The hypothesis of dematerialization of people at the moment of their disappearance is more acceptable. They seem to fall apart into their component parts, molecules and atoms, which then undergo structural changes. To understand how this ultra-fast process develops, let's use our imagination. Let's imagine that a person has turned into an infinitesimal virtual observer who has been placed inside our body. Then the whole universe will open up before him. The tissue molecules in it will look like star systems, and the various organs will look like galaxies. In addition, they all interact with each other, are in constant motion in their microcosm. Previously, it was believed that the laws of this microcosm cannot be transferred to our big world. But in 1997, physicist David Richard of the University of Massachusetts showed that they also work in the macrocosm. From this we can draw the opposite conclusion. It is possible that in the quantum world there are the same processes that are observed in our universe. Astronomers and astrophysicists suggest that there are unusual space objects in its so-called black holes, made of super-dense matter. They have a huge force of attraction, due to which light is locked in them and does not come out. According to the law of gravity, black holes are able to devour stars, their systems, and even entire galaxies, drawing them into themselves. In light of all the above, we can assume that the same black holes occur at the submolecular level and in humans. In this case, they instantly devour it from the inside, leaving no visible trace. Of course, this is only a schematic hypothesis. Time will show how true it is if science takes the mysterious disappearance of people with no apparent external causes seriously, will collect the facts in their thorough analysis. In the meantime, we can only hope that this sad fate will pass you by. In any case, statistics show that its probability is negligible. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more videos of mysterious stories and photos. Check out this playlist and I'll see you in the next video.